Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I've got an interesting gun from Kel-Tec on the table. It is the P17. Please don't forget to check out our website. Go to our affiliates page. You'll find discount codes for things like Mantis Axe and Core belts. You'll find a link that you can sign up for Big Daddy Unlimited. They actually have things in stock and usually at a lower price than other places. Link to that cool little bore light that we use for lighting up the barrels. Use those links. It will often save you money, never will cost you any additional money, and helps the channel. Thank you. This is a 22 caliber, basically a range gun. Now they advertise it as holding 17 rounds. Technically it does if you count the one in the pipe, but it actually comes with 3 of these 16 round magazines. They don't have witness holes or anything on them, but they're relatively easy to load. So for practical purposes, since this is more of a range day gun than a self-defense gun, I don't recommend 22 LR for self-defense, it holds 16 rounds. Nobody Barney's a range day gun. But still, that's actually a pretty good amount of capacity for a fun plinking session at the range. Overall, the gun is actually kind of nice. And probably the most interesting thing about it is that it has an MSRP of $199. And of course it's unloaded. That MSRP you won't realize right now. Everywhere I see these that actually has them in stock, they're over 300, which is kind of interesting. But if things were settled down and we were in normal times, this is a $200 range day gun that comes with 3 mags, which is pretty much everything you need to get right going. It's extremely light. It weighs 12.7 ounces with a loaded mag. It's not a big gun. It's 6.7 inches front to back. It's 5.3 inches tall, and the mag does sit nice and flush. Kind of blends right in with the base of it, and it's only 1.2 inches thick. And that includes the Ambidextrous Safety levers that are on either side. And that's kind of unique for something in this price territory, is a Ambidextrous Safety, and it blends in and it's low profile and it's high enough up that regardless of how you're gripping the gun, you can easily get to it. And it's not going to bite into your hands. A lot of times ambi safeties are disliked because the other side is going to bite into some part of your hand, whether it's here, but this one stays out of the way, and again, it's relatively easy to operate. It's a little harder to put it on safe than it is to take it off, but not difficult really. It comes with a 3-slot Picatinny rail. It's got this Kel-Tec texture. We'll call it the Kel-Tec texture. This is their squares that they like to put on their guns. Now, it's not a particularly grippy texture, but it's a 22. The thing really doesn't recoil. There's no texture on the back strap, and really not any on the front either. But again, it's a 22. Oddly enough, it does have texture here in front of the trigger guard if you wanted to put your finger there. But it's not like this thing recoils that it's going to try to fly out of your hand. It's 22, it stays put, stays level. It's actually fairly easy to shoot well with one exception. And this probably just comes down to my eyes. It does have a fiber optic front sight, and the rear sight is fully adjustable, height and windage, but it's a blackout. And with a combination of a relatively small fiber dot, you can see how the melt bulb is relatively small. Looks bigger here on the film because we're zoomed in, but in reality it's actually kind of a small dot. Combine that with a blackout rear sight, and it can be a little bit difficult, especially with the targets we use, which the target's predominant color is black. It makes it a little difficult to figure out where that rear sight is. Are you high, are you low? Kind of figure it out. But mechanically, I do believe this thing is capable of very good accuracy, because once I figured out how to hold it, especially when I went to that upper right target where I could actually put the backside on some green, found that with a 6 o'clock hold, you can pull a nice grip with this. So once you figure out the sights, or you drill 2 little holes, put white dots on the rear sight so that you have a 3-dot sight, from a plinking perspective, it's actually got the potential to be very accurate. It's comfortable to shoot, it's easy to function and shoot well once you figure out the sights. So overall, it's kind of a cool little gun. The slide is relatively easy to operate, and it's fairly light, and it's this whole top piece. And don't let these 2 screws confuse you. It's not designed to put a red dot on it. I'm sure you could get something to work, but you probably will have function problems if you do, because that red dot would then be reciprocating, and there's not a lot of energy in 22 LR. One thing we did notice about this is it did eject well. It had a nice, solid, firm ejection pattern. So it does function well and it kicks the shell out there, but if you put another couple ounces of reciprocating mass on here, you're probably going to end up with a little bit of difficulty. They do recommend that you don't allow it to slam closed on an empty chamber, and of course it's not dry fire safe. I do want to demonstrate the trigger. So I've got this magazine loaded with snap caps. These are just inert dummy rounds that protect the firing pin during dry fire testing, because one of the characteristics of this is it does have a nice trigger. Make sure one goes in. So I have a snap cap in the chamber. I gotta put it on fire, of course. Minimal take up. A little bit of, after you do the take up, you have kind of an initial feeling like you might be on a wall, and there's the break. And it's between 3 and 4 pounds. It's an extremely light trigger. I'll make sure, yep, I'm going to make sure each time I've got one in the chamber. And by the way, that snap cap flew all the way to the back of the studio, so it even ejects snap caps well. There's the reset. A little bit of take up, and then again, a really light break. This has got a wonderful trigger. And that little bit of creep that you see in there, there's no stacking during that creep. And at the range, that all but completely disappeared from a field perspective. One of the things I'll say about this, the trigger is really nice on it. I'm going to put it back on safe. Oh, you can't put this one on safe unless it's been cycled. Basically, the hammer needs to be cocked. So I'm going to make sure it's empty. I'm going to close it. I'm going to put it back on safe because I don't want to accidentally pull the trigger and dry fire it. This is not rated for dry fire at all. Dry firing this, like any other 22, there's very few on the market that tolerate dry fire, can do irreparable damage to either the firing pin or the chamber or both. So this is not a dry fire practice gun. Even maintaining this is going to be relatively easy to live with, though it is a little bit cumbersome, but not bad. Pull down on these two tabs, and while you're pulling down on these two tabs, you pull back on the slide until it comes off, lift it up, and slide it forward. And the only thing that makes it cumbersome at all is you've got to hold these tabs down, and then when you start pulling back the gun, it wants to pull out of your hands. So what I did is I hooked my finger. Of course, I've already made sure I've cleared it at that point. Hook my finger in the trigger guard, pull down on the tabs so the gun can't pull with the slide. As you pull the slide back, you'll feel it get far enough back you can lift it off and slide it forward. At this point, this is a blowback gun, like most 22s, so the barrel is fixed in position, and it's fairly easy to get to clean it. The other thing I did find is that the hammer sticks up just enough to interfere with a cleaning rod coming in from the back, so I ended up having to clean it from the front. But it's not a particularly big deal. It's got a nice feed ramp and a nice solid lock. So overall, this part is quite well constructed. And then when you look at the slide, it's kind of an interesting setup. Got a little bit of oil pooling there. Interesting setup. It's got a bolt back here that is bolted to the slide. So that's what these two bolts here do. I'm using the word bolt a bunch of times. You can remove this to clean the internals of it, but it's not necessary for routine maintenance. And as a rule, I wouldn't do it unless you've gotten issues where the firing pin is getting gummed up or something, because there's a lot of little parts in here, and if you take this apart, parts are going to fly, and you may have a little bit of fun getting it all back together again. The rails are kind of reverse rails. So this is a rail here, and it kind of hooks, so you can see I've got my fingernail hooked up underneath it, one on the other side, and those interact with the frame with these two little hook rails here. So they're kind of inside rails as opposed to outside rails. On most guns, these would face out, and then these would be cuts in the slide, but this one works a little bit differently. But general cleaning and maintenance you can do right from this point. So you pull it apart like that, no tools required, clean, oil, do your thing, and then reassembling it's roughly just as easy. I'm going to do the same hook the finger here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this over the end of the barrel. It's easy to do when you're turned it correctly. I was trying to do it on camera. And then pull down on the little hooks. I brought the slide back. You can see it, you'll feel it kind of push down in, and then bring it forward and let go of the hooks. Now the biggest thing to remember is, a lot of times from a reassembly standpoint, a habit is to cycle it, snap the trigger as a function check. Don't snap the trigger on this. In fact, when you disassemble it, the best thing to do is to have it on safe, so cock it, what you're going to do when you safety check it to make sure it's empty. put it on safe so that you can't even pop the trigger while you've got it apart. Other than being careful not to dry fire this, it's easy to disassemble, easy to maintain, easy to live with, and easy to run. The magazines are even fairly easy to load, other than the fact they don't have any witness holes other than what you've got at the top. Because if you get it down here, I can't tell whether this has got 12 rounds or 5 rounds basically. So you can tell at the top that's about it. It was fun to shoot at the range, and it was reliable. It worked from round 1 to the last round. Now, one note I'll make on this, and this is not unusual for 22s, they usually call for a particular velocity and bullet weight. This is looking for you to use high velocity ammo, something like the CCI mini mags. This is not designed for low power or quiet 22s or anything like that. So you feed it the appropriate ammo and it should work well for you. And one note before we go, as a throwback for Kel-Tec fans, we've got one of the older versions. This is a Kel-Tec P40, and we're going to do a review on this. And this is a gun that's kind of started Kel-Tec, or not necessarily this specific one, but this generation of guns. So we're going to kind of go back in time to one of what was probably one of the first really light, reasonably priced concealed carry guns. That was the primary market they were in before concealed carry was a well-serviced market area. Kel-Tec had some offerings in there, and they were actually quite popular. But beyond that, if you're looking for a Plinker, and you're looking for a fun gun, and by the way, I failed to mention, it has an ambidextrous magazine release as well, and it's a paddle style, but you can get to it from either side. But again, if you're looking for a fun range day gun, a Plinker, something for younger shooters that are learning the sport, it's easy to live with, and once we get past the overpricing game that's going on right now, easy to buy, you actually can't go wrong with this gun. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up there to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, kind of everywhere. And thank you.